I didn't expect her to be there that evening. It was one of those quiet nights when the cafe near my apartment felt more like a retreat than a public space. The kind of place where the hum of the espresso machine blended with the soft jazz in the background, and the world outside the windows seemed to slow down. I came for the usual, a cup of coffee, maybe an hour to myself. But instead, I noticed her. She sat by the corner window, a book open in front of her, though she wasn't reading. She had that look of someone who'd lived enough life to carry both grace and a quiet heaviness in the same expression. Her hair was neatly tied, a few strands falling loose, and her fingers absent-mindedly traced the rim of her cup. I would have thought she belonged in some old painting, the kind where you can't decide if the subject is smiling or keeping a secret. At first, I only stole glances, telling myself not to linger. She was clearly older than me, 10, maybe 15 years. Not the kind of woman you casually approach without hesitation. But something about the way she shifted in her seat, or how her eyes moved when someone walked past, made me wonder what she was waiting for. I went up to the counter to get sugar for my drink. As fate would have it, she stood up at the same time, carrying her own cup to refill. We reached for the small glass jar of sugar almost at once, and our hands brushed lightly. Just skin against skin for less than a second, but enough for me to notice the warmth of her touch. "Sorry," I said quickly, pulling back a little. She gave a faint smile, almost amused. "No need to be." Her voice was calm, low, carrying a softness that felt oddly grounding. We both stirred our drinks in silence for a moment. I could smell her perfume. Subtle, not overwhelming, something floral with a hint of spice. It stayed with me even after I walked back to my seat. But then, something unexpected happened. The cafe grew busier, and a couple came in looking for a table. Every seat was taken except the one across from me. She glanced around, searching for a spot, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, I gestured toward the empty chair at my table. "There's space here if you'd like," I offered. She hesitated, her eyes studying me, as though measuring whether it was worth it. Then she nodded, quietly thanking me before sitting down. She placed her book on the table, her fingers resting lightly on the cover. For a while, neither of us spoke. Just the sound of coffee cups clinking, pages turning, and the faint music filling the space between us. Yet I felt her presence, calm, self-possessed, and strangely comforting. That was the first moment I realized how a simple encounter could shift the weight of an entire evening. And though she didn't know it yet, she had already captured my attention in a way that was impossible to ignore. First, it was enough just having her sit across from me. The table between us felt like safe territory, neutral ground where neither of us owed the other anything. She sipped her drink, occasionally glancing at the book in front of her, and I pretended to be absorbed in mine. But it was impossible not to notice the little things. The way she tilted her head slightly when she read a line twice, or how her lips pressed together before she took another sip. The silence stretched on until the cafe's playlist shifted to an older jazz song, something with a rhythm that made the quiet feel less heavy. I caught her tapping her finger lightly on the table in time with the music. "You like this one?" I asked, almost surprising myself. She looked up, eyes narrowing slightly as if she was deciding how much of herself to reveal. "I do. Reminds me of a place I used to go years ago." Her voice had that same grounded softness I'd noticed earlier, the kind that made even ordinary words seem like they carried more weight. I smiled, leaning forward a little. "A cafe like this?" "Not exactly. It was smaller, a little louder, more alive. But the music, yes, very much like this." She paused, her gaze slipping past me as though she was seeing it in her mind. Funny how certain sounds can pull you back somewhere. Something about the way she said it made me want to keep her talking. "Where was it?" She hesitated, then shook her head gently, as though closing a door. "Another city. Another time." I didn't press further, but I noticed the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her lips, like she knew she'd given me just enough to stay curious. Our conversation wove itself from there, not forced but natural. We talked about books first. She teased me for choosing something she called pretentiously heavy, while I pointed out that her own novel looked suspiciously like a romance. She laughed, a quick sound that seemed to escape against her will, and in that laugh I caught a glimpse of someone less guarded, more playful. The cafe was growing noisier as the night went on, but somehow our small table still felt like its own corner of the world. Her hands moved as she spoke, subtle gestures that drew my eyes to them more than once. Once, when she leaned forward to emphasize a point, her fingers rested close to mine on the table, close enough that I felt the temptation to slide my hand just a little nearer. I didn't, but the thought lingered. "I don't usually talk to strangers," she said at one point, half to herself. I smiled. "Then maybe I'm lucky tonight." She held my gaze for a moment, longer than politeness required, before looking away. I could tell she wasn't used to being looked at like that. Not with admiration free of expectation, not with interest that didn't disguise itself. And in that fleeting silence, I knew something had shifted. The night was slipping away. The cafe staff had started stacking chairs at the far end, a quiet signal that closing time wasn't far off. Our table, though, still felt like a small island of light, untouched by the hour. I noticed her glance at the clock on the wall, then at the book she hadn't touched since she sat down. She straightened her posture, brushing an invisible crease from her sleeve, as if reminding herself it was time to leave. "It's getting late," she said softly, though her tone sounded more like hesitation than certainty. I nodded, but before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "I don't mind if you stay a little longer." She blinked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Why?" The question caught me off guard. Why? Because the room felt different with her in it. Because her voice had turned an ordinary evening into something I didn't want to end. I hesitated, searching for a reason that wasn't too much, too soon. Because it's rare to feel like a conversation is more interesting than the place you're in. And right now, you're making this place feel alive. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment, she didn't answer. She simply looked at me, really looked, as though weighing whether my words were sincere or just a polite attempt at flattery. Finally, she let out a soft laugh, almost to herself. "You have a way of saying things that makes it hard to argue." That laugh, that tiny crack in her guardedness, was enough to keep her seated. She set her coat back on the chair and leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "All right then," she said, her eyes holding mine a moment longer than before. The cafe lights dimmed slightly, shadows stretching across the floor. Outside the wide windows, the street was quiet, just the occasional car passing, headlights casting fleeting reflections across the glass. Inside, it felt like the world had shrunk to the sound of her voice and the warmth of her presence across from me. We talked about little things, places we'd been, books we'd meant to finish but never did, the way certain songs could pin down entire memories. At one point, she described a trip she had taken years ago, her words painting images so vivid that I could almost see the narrow streets and hear the bustle she spoke of. As she spoke, I caught myself studying her face, the subtle lines near her eyes that deepened when she smiled, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she grew thoughtful. They weren't flaws. They were details, markers of a life lived, and they only made her more magnetic. When she paused, catching me looking at her, she tilted her head with a half-smile. "You keep staring," she said. I didn't deny it. "Maybe I just don't want to miss anything." Her smile faded into something gentler, something quieter. She lowered her gaze for a moment, her fingers brushing the rim of her cup. And though she said nothing, she didn't reach for her coat again. The next time we saw each other, it wasn't planned. Or maybe it was fate, though I wasn't bold enough to call it that. I had gone back to the cafe a few evenings later, not expecting her, but secretly hoping. And there she was again, seated by the same window, her book open, her expression distant, like someone who wanted to be lost in her thoughts but kept finding her way back. When she noticed me, her lips curved into a polite smile, but her eyes carried a different weight this time. Not surprise, not indifference, something closer to caution. "Back again?" she asked as I walked over. "Seems like we both are," I said lightly. She gestured to the chair across from her, but when I sat down, she leaned back slightly, her arms crossing. Her body language told me what her words hadn't yet. Tonight, she was guarded. We talked, but the words weren't as easy as before. She deflected questions with vague answers, steered the conversation toward safer ground. I found myself searching for the warmth I'd seen the other night, the sparkle that had broken through her hesitation. Finally, when I caught her gaze and let it linger, she spoke the words that had clearly been building inside her. "Don't look at me like that." Her tone wasn't sharp, but firm. A boundary. I blinked, not sure whether to apologize or challenge it. My heart thudded against my ribs, but I found my voice steady. "How else should I look at you?" The question hung between us like a weight. She shifted in her seat, eyes dropping to her hands clasped tightly on the table. For a moment, I thought she might get up and leave, but she didn't. Instead, she sighed, her shoulders softening. "You're young," she said quietly, finally meeting my eyes. "And I'm not. Whatever it is you think you're seeing, it's not what you imagine." Her honesty stung, but not in the way rejection usually does. This wasn't dismissal. It was self-protection. "I'm not imagining anything," I replied softly. "I'm just noticing, and I can't help the way I notice you." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. She looked away toward the window, watching a car's headlights sweep across the glass. The silence stretched, heavy but alive. I leaned in slightly, careful not to push too far. "If it bothers you, I'll stop. But I can't promise I'll stop feeling what I feel." That earned me the faintest smile, small and reluctant, but real. She shook her head as though she found me impossible, and maybe she did. But she didn't get up. She stayed. And in her staying, I understood something. Her hesitation wasn't about me. It was about her, the years between us, the way the world might see us, the walls she'd built to keep herself safe. But for the first time, I also saw those walls waver. I hadn't expected her mood to shift so quickly. One moment, we were trading small observations about the people drifting in and out of the cafe, and the next, her entire body language changed. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes flicked away from mine as though contact had become too much. It was subtle at first. I thought maybe she was simply tired. But then I realized it wasn't fatigue. It was me. More specifically, the way I was looking at her. Her voice came low, almost a whisper but edged with firmness. "Don't look at me like that." The words cut through the music, the chatter, the clinking cups. For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. I hadn't meant for my gaze to betray me, but how could it not? Everything about her, the quiet strength in the way she carried herself, the faint sadness behind her smile, the effortless beauty that didn't ask for attention but demanded it anyway, pulled me in. So I said the only truth I had. "How else should I look at you?" The question landed heavy, and for a moment, I thought I'd gone too far. Her lips pressed together, her fingers tightening around her cup. I could see the conflict ripple across her expression. Irritation, defense, and then something softer. Fear, maybe, or longing. She exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "You're too young to know what you're doing, and I'm too old to pretend it doesn't matter." I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "I know what I'm doing. I'm sitting here enjoying your company. That's all." Her eyes flicked up to mine again, sharp at first, but they lingered longer than before. The silence stretched between us, taut and fragile, like a string drawn tight. I could almost hear the quickened rhythm of my own heartbeat. She shifted in her seat, arms crossing over her chest. "You think it's that simple? You think you can just look at me that way, and nothing comes of it?" I smiled gently, not in defiance, but in reassurance. "I think sometimes looking is enough. Sometimes it says everything words can't." For the first time that night, she seemed unprepared for my answer. Her gaze faltered, her guard slipping for just an instant. I saw the faintest tremble in her hand as she set down her cup, as though steadying herself. The cafe around us blurred. Conversations, footsteps, laughter. All of it faded to background noise. It was only her and me, caught in a silence that felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders easing. You shouldn't make me feel like this." Her confession wasn't loud, but it was real. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't asking me to stop. She was asking herself if she could allow it to continue. And though she didn't realize it yet, her hesitation only drew me closer. The cafe had nearly emptied by the time we decided to leave. She gathered her things with careful, deliberate movements, as if drawing strength from the routine of folding her coat neatly over her arm and sliding her book into her bag. I offered to walk her out, not expecting her to agree. But when she glanced at the quiet street beyond the window, she hesitated, and then nodded. The night air was cooler than I expected, crisp enough that our breath lingered faintly in the glow of the street lamps. The road was lined with trees that swayed gently, their leaves whispering in the breeze. We fell into step together, not too close, but not distant either. The rhythm of our footsteps seemed to fill the spaces where words failed us. For a while, we talked about unimportant things, the weather, the changing season, the neighborhood. But slowly, almost naturally, the conversation deepened. She spoke about time, about how quickly years seemed to fold into one another, leaving behind both memories and regrets. "I used to think I'd have it all figured out by now," she said, her voice steady but laced with something unspoken. "Career, family, the kind of life people expect you to build. But it turns out, some things never fall neatly into place. They just stay unresolved." Her honesty disarmed me. I could feel the weight behind her words, the years of decisions and compromises she rarely admitted aloud. "Maybe that's the point," I said quietly. "If everything was figured out, life would stop surprising us." She glanced at me, her expression softening for a brief moment. "You say that like you've lived enough to know." "Maybe I haven't," I admitted. "But I know what it feels like to miss something, or someone, and to wonder if you'll ever get that moment back." We walked in silence after that, her eyes fixed on the pavement, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Then, as if testing the air between us, she asked, "What do you regret?" The question stopped me. I thought about it carefully before answering. Not speaking up when I should have. Holding back because I was afraid of what people might think. It makes you realize how many chances you can lose just by hesitating. I didn't mean it as a confession, but when she looked at me, I saw recognition in her eyes, as if she heard the echo of her own fears in my words. Her hand moved slightly, brushing against mine as we walked. Could have been accidental, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered just close enough that the warmth of her skin seeped into me. I didn't reach for her. Not yet. But in that fragile moment, we both understood something unspoken. That our regrets weren't about the past anymore. They were about what we might lose if we chose to ignore what was happening right now. And though no declarations were made, the silence between us had shifted. It was no longer empty. It was alive, trembling with possibility. We ended up at a quiet bench just off the main road, half hidden beneath the overhang of an old tree. The street lamps cast a soft amber glow across the pavement, and the world around us felt hushed, like the night itself was conspiring to give us privacy. She sat first, brushing a few stray leaves from the wooden slats before lowering herself. I took the space beside her, careful to leave a respectful distance. Still, it wasn't long before that distance felt unnecessary, almost unnatural, as though the air itself was urging us closer. For a while, neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with meaning, filled with every unsaid word that had been building between us since the first night we met. I stole a glance at her. The glow of the lamp softened her features, tracing her cheekbones, highlighting the faint lines that told stories of laughter and loss. She looked both older and younger in that light, timeless in a way that unsettled me. Finally, she broke the silence. "This isn't supposed to happen," she murmured. Her words didn't surprise me, but the tremor in her voice did. She wasn't lecturing me. She was confessing to herself. I shifted slightly, closing the space between us by just an inch. "Then why does it feel like it already has?" Her eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, she didn't look away. The intensity of her gaze pulled me in, made the rest of the world blur at the edges. Then, almost reluctantly, she sighed and shook her head, as though trying to free herself from a spell. "You're too young to understand what comes with this," she said, her tone firmer now. "People talk. People judge. And She stopped, biting her lip before the words could finish. I didn't argue. Instead, I let my hand rest gently on the bench, close enough that my fingers brushed hers. It was a small gesture, cautious, but the effect was immediate. She tensed at first, then her shoulders dropped, and her hand remained where it was. Her fingers didn't move toward mine, but they didn't retreat either. The silence that followed was electric. I could feel her warmth, the delicate tremor in her breath, the subtle shift of her body leaning ever so slightly toward me. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, almost a whisper. "You make it hard to keep my distance." I turned my palm upward, wordlessly offering. For a moment I thought she would refuse. But then, slowly, her hand slipped into mine. Her fingers were cool against my skin, but the longer they rested there, the warmer they became. She closed her eyes briefly, as though the simple contact carried more weight than she was prepared to admit. And when she opened them again, she whispered, "We shouldn't," but she didn't let go. And in that fragile contradiction, her words of resistance, her hands still folded into mine, I understood how close we were to crossing a line neither of us could easily step back from. The walk to her home was quiet, but it wasn't the strained kind of quiet. It was the kind that carried everything words could not. Her hand still rested in mine, fingers curled lightly, as if she wasn't sure whether to hold on or let go. I didn't squeeze or pull. I simply matched her pace, letting her decide how long the moment would last. The streets grew emptier as we went, the night deeper, softer. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, casting halos of light on the sidewalk. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, though the coolness of the evening didn't seem to bother her as much as the thoughts running through her mind. When we reached her building, she slowed. Her hand slipped from mine, not abruptly, but gently, as though returning something she'd borrowed. She turned to face me, standing just inside the pool of lamplight. "This is where I say good night," she said, her voice quiet, almost careful. I nodded, though I felt the reluctance in my chest. "Good night, then." But neither of us moved. She lingered at the edge of the moment, caught between leaving and staying. Her eyes searched mine, as if looking for something she couldn't name. Finally, she reached up, her hand brushing lightly against my cheek. The touch was fleeting, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Her thumb lingered near the corner of my jaw before retreating, and I felt the ghost of her touch long after it was gone. "You make things complicated," she whispered, half smiling. "Or maybe just a little clearer," I replied. Her smile faltered into something softer, more vulnerable. For a moment, she seemed as if she might step back, retreat behind the safety of her door. But instead, she leaned forward, just slightly, until the space between us disappeared. She didn't kiss me. She rested her forehead lightly against mine. It was a quiet gesture, but it stole the air from my lungs. Her breath mingled with mine, steady, warm. I closed my eyes, letting the closeness sink in. The faint scent of her perfume, the warmth of her skin, the soft tremble of her hesitation. We stayed like that for a long moment, two people standing in the glow of a street lamp, holding on to a silence that meant more than any words could. When she finally pulled back, her hand grazed mine again, deliberate this time. She didn't hold it, just let her fingers slip away slowly, as if promising it wouldn't be the last time. "Good night," she said again, but her tone was different now, gentler, carrying something unspoken. I watched as she turned and disappeared inside, the soft click of the door closing behind her. And though the night felt colder without her beside me, I knew it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something fragile, something uncertain, but undeniably real. And as I walked away, I carried the weight of her touch, the warmth of her forehead against mine, and the quiet certainty that whatever lay ahead, we had already crossed the first line together.